A sharp laugh cut through the glittering Lincoln Center lobby as Emma Larson stepped inside her worn sneakers, squeaking against the marble. Her faded jacket and unstyled hair marked her as an outsider among the sequined gowns. "Is she lost a woman?" In Pearl smirked loud enough to sting. Whispers slithered through the crowd, each word a jab at her place in their world. Emma clutched her cleaning badge, silent but unyielding. To them, she was nothing a shadow in their spotlight. Yet none knew the truth. She held the key to silencing their scorn, and tonight she'd play it. Have you ever been judged before you could speak share below? And stay tuned to see Emma's stand. Every crystal chandelier in Lincoln Center's grand lobby seemed to mock her presence. Emma Larson stood there, a solitary figure in a sea of opulence, her faded jacket a stark contrast to the silk and satin swirling around her. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes and the low hum of self-assured laughter, each sound a reminder of a world that didn't welcome her. At 57, Emma had spent decades polishing these same marble floors, her hands calloused from nights spent scrubbing away the traces of evenings like this. Yet tonight she wasn't here to clean. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her cleaning badge tucked into her pocket, her heart thudding with a secret she'd kept for years. The gala was a celebration of the New York Philharmonic's new season, a glittering affair where Manhattan's elite mingled with music's brightest stars. Velvet drapes framed towering windows, and the scent of expensive perfume hung heavy, almost suffocating. Guests glided past their heels, clicking like a metronome against the stone, their conversations laced with names of composers and exclusive retreats. Emma watched them, her gray eyes steady but unguarded, catching the flicker of a world she'd only ever seen from the shadows. She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag, its frayed edges a quiet rebellion against the polished perfection around her. To anyone looking, she was just the help who'd wandered too far from the service entrance. Years ago, Emma had dreamed of music. As a girl in a small Brooklyn apartment, she'd sit at her mother's upright piano, her small fingers chasing melodies she heard on the radio. Her mother, a seamstress with a voice like warm honey, would hum along, promising lessons they could never afford. But when illness took her mother, the piano was sold to cover bills, and Emma's dreams were packed away with it. Life became a series of practical choices, waitressing night school, raising a daughter alone. Yet music never left her. In stolen moments, she'd hum Chopin's nocturnes while mopping these very halls, her heart playing notes her hands couldn't reach. Now, as she stood in the lobby, Emma felt the weight of those years. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was pulled into a simple bun, her face free of makeup, her sneakers silent against the clamor of stilettos. She didn't belong here, not in their eyes. A young woman in an emerald gown brushed past her glance, sliding over Emma as if she were a part of the decor. "Careful, you'll block the view," she said with a laugh, her voice sharp enough to cut. Others nearby turned their eyes, narrowing their smiles thin and practiced. Emma stepped back, her fingers tightening around her bag, but her posture remained steady, her silence louder than their chatter. Across the room, Victor Hensley, the night's guest of honor, held court. At 61, the revered music critic was a fixture in New York's classical scene, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his tailored suit, a testament to his untouchable status. His reviews in the metropolitan ear could make or break careers, and tonight he was judging an open audition for the Philharmonic's guest pianist slot, a rare chance for an unknown to shine. His voice carried over the crowd, smooth and biting. "Talent without pedigree is just noise," he said, eliciting nods from his admirers. His assistant, a sleek woman named Lydia Crane, leaned in her diamond earrings, catching the light. "I hear they're letting anyone try out tonight," she murmured, her tone dripping with disdain. "Even the staff." Emma caught the words, her breath hitching. She'd heard about the audition from Daniel Harper, the theater's assistant manager, a kind-eyed man who'd once caught her humming Brahms during a late shift. "You should try Emma," he'd said, pressing an application into her hand. "I've heard you at that old piano in the rehearsal room." She'd laughed it off, but the form now sat in her bag, filled out in her careful script. As she lingered near a column, a security guard named Marcus, who'd worked the night shift with her for years, passed by. He gave her a subtle nod, his eyes warm with an unspoken understanding. "You're not here to clean tonight, are you?" he whispered. Emma didn't answer, but the faintest smile touched her lips. The crowd's murmurs grew sharper, their glances like needles pricking her skin. Lydia's voice rose again, loud enough to carry. "I hope they keep the stage clear of..." Distractions, she said, her eyes flicking toward Emma. The words landed like a slap, and the air seemed to tighten. Emma stood still, her gaze fixed on the grand staircase leading to the auditorium. The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the evening's program. As the crowd moved toward the doors, Emma remained, her heart a quiet drumbeat. Something was coming, and the weight of it pressed against her chest. She shouldn't be here, should she? The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade, as Lydia Crane's voice sliced through the Lincoln Center lobby. Emma Larson froze, her sneakers rooted to the marble floor, the weight of 100 eyes pressing against her. The gala's golden glow seemed to dim the clink of champagne flutes fading, as the crowd's attention turned hungry for a spectacle. At 57, Emma was used to blending into the background, her cleaning rag a shield against notice. But tonight, with her application for the Philharmonic's audition tucked in her bag, she was exposed a sparrow among peacocks. Lydia stood at the center of a small circle of glittering guests, her emerald gown catching the chandelier's light, her smile a practiced curve of disdain. She tilted her head, her diamond earrings glinting as she appraised Emma. "I mean, really," she said loud enough for the nearby cluster to hear. "Did someone forget to check the guest list? This isn't the staff lounge." A ripple of laughter followed light, but cutting like glass shards scattered across the floor. A man in a tailored tuxedo leaned in, his voice low but deliberate. "Maybe she's here to mop up after us," he said, his smirk inviting more chuckles. Emma's fingers tightened around her canvas bag, the frayed strap biting into her palm, but her face remained still, her gray eyes fixed on a distant point. The crowd's whispers grew bolder, each word a pinprick. "Look at her shoes," a young woman in a sapphire dress murmured to her companion, her voice dripping with pity. "I didn't know they let the help mingle." Another guest, a middle-aged man with a Rolex glinting on his wrist, raised his glass as if toasting her discomfort. "Bold of her to show up," he said, his tone mocking. "What's next?" The janitor conducting the orchestra. The laughter swelled, a chorus of dismissal that echoed off the marble walls. Emma stood alone, her faded jacket a silent testament to her place in their world, or lack of it. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she didn't move, didn't speak. Her silence was her armor, though it trembled under the assault. Victor Hensley, the night's revered critic, stood nearby, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. At 61, his presence commanded the room, his every word a verdict. He glanced at Emma, his piercing eyes narrowing as if she were a smudge on a masterpiece. "Lydia, dear," he said, his voice smooth but cold, "perhaps you could remind the staff to stay in their designated areas." The words were polite, but they landed like a whip, stripping Emma of any claim to the space. Lydia's smile widened, her gaze locking onto Emma. "Oh, I'm sure she's just confused," she said, her tone syrupy with false kindness. "Why don't you head back to the service entrance, sweetheart? You'll be more comfortable there." She gestured toward the exit, her manicured hand slicing through the air. The humiliation deepened as a young usher barely out of college approached Emma, his face flushed with secondhand embarrassment. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this area is for ticketed guests. Only?" he said, his voice low but firm. He held out a hand as if to guide her away, his eyes avoiding hers. Emma's breath caught her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. She took a step back, her sneakers squeaking again, the sound amplified in the sudden hush. A woman nearby, her pearls gleaming, pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a giggle. "Poor thing," she whispered to her friend, loud enough for Emma to hear. "She must be so embarrassed." The lobby seemed to close in the opulence now, a cage. Emma's mind flashed to her mother, who'd once told her, "Hold your head up, Em. They can't take what's inside you." But here, surrounded by this glittering mob, that truth felt distant. She was no one to them, a shadow who dared to step into the light. Lydia took a step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous purr. "You don't belong here," she said, her words meant for Emma alone. "This is a place for people who've earned their spot." She paused, letting the silence sharpen her meaning. "Not someone who scrubs floors." The final blow came as Victor Hensley turned away, dismissing Emma with a flick of his wrist. "Let's move on," he said to his entourage, his tone bored. "We have actual talent to evaluate." The crowd followed his lead, their attention shifting as if Emma had ceased to exist. But Lydia lingered, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Don't take it personally," she said, her voice loud enough to carry. "Some people are just invisible." The word hung in the air heavy as stone as she turned on her heel, her gown swishing like a curtain, closing on Emma's dignity. Emma stood frozen, her hands trembling her bag, slipping slightly from her grip. The crowd's laughter faded into a dull roar, their voices blending into the hum of the gala. She could leave now, slip back to the service entrance, to the safety of her mop and her solitude. But something held her there, a stubborn spark deep within. She straightened her shoulders, squaring her fingers, brushing the application form in her bag. The auditorium doors opened, and the first notes of a prelude drifted out beckoning. Emma's eyes flickered toward the stage, her heart a quiet rebellion against the weight of their scorn. The laughter had stopped, but the silence was heavier. Emma Larson stood alone in the Lincoln Center lobby, the gala's golden light now a distant shimmer, as if the room itself had turned its back on her. The crowd had drifted toward the auditorium, their voices a fading hum, leaving her with nothing but the echo of their scorn. At 57, she'd endured judgment before whispers about her worn clothes, her calloused hands. But this was different. This was a public stripping of her worth, and for the first time in years, Emma felt the ground beneath her waver. She clutched her canvas bag, its frayed strap a lifeline, and moved toward a shadowed corner near the grand staircase. The marble felt cold beneath her sneakers, each step a reminder of her place in this world. Her heart pounded not with anger, but with a deeper ache, a voice inside whispering, "They're right. You don't belong." She sank onto a velvet bench, her breath shallow, her gray eyes tracing the intricate patterns in the floor. The application form for the Philharmonic's audition, still tucked in her bag, now felt like a foolish dream, a child's scribble on a page meant for giants. Why had she thought she could step into their spotlight? She was Emma Larson, the woman who mopped their floors, not a pianist destined for their stage. Her mind drifted to a memory long buried. She was 9, sitting at her mother's upright piano in their cramped Brooklyn apartment, her small fingers stumbling through a Chopin waltz. Her mother, frail but radiant, had clapped softly, her voice a warm promise. "You've got music in your bones, Em. Don't let anyone take that away." But life had other plans. When her mother passed, the piano was sold, and Emma's dreams were folded into a box of practical choices. Bills a daughter to raise nights spent cleaning to make ends meet. She'd accepted it, hadn't she? She'd learned to hum her melodies in silence, to play them in her mind while scrubbing these very halls. So, why did it hurt so much now? Standing here invisible again, Emma's fingers brushed the thin silver chain around her neck, a gift from her mother, its tiny pendant shaped like a musical note. She held it tightly, the metal warm against her skin. And for a moment, the ache softened. She thought of her daughter now grown, who'd never heard her play, who'd only known her as the woman who worked late and smiled through exhaustion. She thought of Daniel Harper, the assistant manager who'd pressed the audition form into her hand, his eyes kind but insistent. "You're more than they see, Emma," he'd said. But was she? The weight of Lydia's words. "You don't belong here," pressed harder, threatening to snuff out the spark she'd carried for so long. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked toward the auditorium doors. The prelude's final notes drifted out soft and haunting, like a call she wasn't sure she could answer. Her hand rested on the door's brass handle, her reflection faint in the polished surface. She could walk away, return to her cart, her mop the comfort of the shadows. No one would notice. No one would care. But her fingers tightened on the pendant, the musical note pressing into her palm. A single breath, slow and deliberate, filled her lungs. She wasn't ready to leave, not yet. The doors loomed before her, the stage beyond them, a world she'd never dared to claim. But as she stood there, something shifted, a quiet resolve taking root in the silence. No one noticed her slip through the auditorium doors. Emma Larson at 57 moved with the quiet grace of someone who'd spent years fading into the background, her sneakers silent against the plush carpet of Lincoln Center's theater. The gala crowd had settled into their seats, their murmurs a soft hum beneath the crystal chandeliers. The stage stood empty, the grand Steinway piano gleaming under a single spotlight, waiting for the next audition candidate. Emma's heart pounded, her canvas bag clutched tightly, the audition form inside, now a fragile tether to a dream she'd barely dared to hold. She paused in the shadows, her gray eyes fixed on the piano, as the weight of the night's scorn threatened to pull her back. The announcer's voice cut through the air, crisp and formal. "Next candidate, please." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. As no one rose from the rows of polished contenders, young musicians with conservatory pedigrees, their tailored outfits as flawless as their resumes. Victor Hensley, the revered critic, leaned forward in his front row seat, his silver hair catching the light, his expression one of impatient curiosity. At 61, he was accustomed to excellence, his pen poised to dissect the next performance. Lydia Crane, his assistant, whispered something to him, her emerald gown shimmering as she smirked. "Probably another amateur wasting our time," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to nod in agreement. Emma felt their words like a gust of cold air, but she took a step forward, her breath steadying. Daniel Harper, the assistant manager, stood near the stage, his kind eyes scanning the room. He spotted Emma in the wings and gave her a subtle nod, his face alight with quiet encouragement. She'd confided in him about the audition form, and he'd urged her to try his belief in her, a lifeline, through the gala's cruelty. Now, as she moved toward the stage, Daniel's presence anchored her. The crowd's murmurs grew sharper, a mix of confusion and amusement, as Emma emerged into the spotlight. Her faded jacket and unstyled hair marked her as an anomaly, a cleaning woman who'd wandered too far from her place. Whispers slithered through the seats. "Is that the janitor?" a man in a tuxedo muttered. "What is she doing up there?" A woman in pearls hissed, her voice thick with disdain. Victor adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowing as he consulted his program. "Emma Larson," he said, his tone clipped as if her name were a clerical error. "No conservatory listed. Occupation, evening custodian." A soft chuckle rippled through the audience, and Lydia's laugh was the loudest, a sharp note that pierced the air. Emma stood by the piano, her hands trembling, but her posture unyielding. She met Victor's gaze, her gray eyes steady, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Whenever you're ready," Ms. Larson Victor said, his voice dripping with skepticism, his pen already scratching a note. He leaned back, expecting a brief, forgettable performance, a formality before the real talent. Emma sat at the Steinway, the bench cool beneath her. The keys gleamed familiar from years of stolen midnight practice when she'd play after her cleaning shifts, the hall her only audience. She closed her eyes, her fingers hovering, and thought of her mother's voice, soft and sure. "Play what's in your heart, Em." The first chords of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the auditorium, their delicate resonance cutting through the crowd's murmurs like a whisper that demanded silence. Emma's hands moved with a grace that belied her lack of formal training, each note a thread of emotion woven from years of quiet passion. The music wasn't flawless. A trained ear might catch an uneven phrase, but it was alive, raw, and achingly honest. Victor's pen paused, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. This was no amateur's stumble. The Nocturne's melancholy swelled its tender passages, carrying the weight of a life unspoken, and Emma played as if the room had vanished, as if it were just her and the music. The crowd's whispers died, replaced by a stunned hush. Lydia's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her program. A young musician in the back, who'd scoffed earlier, now sat wide-eyed, her hands clasped tightly. Daniel watched from the wings, his face glowing with pride, as if he'd always known this moment would come. As the Nocturne reached its climax, Emma's body swayed slightly, her face reflecting the music's ebb and flow, sorrow, hope, defiance. The final notes lingered soft as a sigh, and the silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that swallowed the room's earlier mockery. Then a single clap broke the stillness, followed by another, until applause erupted, tentative at first, then thunderous. Orchestra members in the audience exchanged glances, their skepticism replaced by awe. Victor remained still, his expression unreadable, his pen forgotten in his hand. Lydia shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting to the crowd, searching for allies who no longer met her gaze. Emma opened her eyes, startled by the sound, as if waking from a dream. She rose slowly, her hands folding in front of her, her face calm but unguarded. Victor cleared his throat, his voice softer than before. "Ms. Larson?" He said, the skepticism gone that was unexpected. He paused, choosing his words with care. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Emma's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "Here, sir, after hours on this piano for years." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd, and Victor's eyes widened, a flicker of respect breaking through his composure. He leaned forward, his tone almost gentle. "You'll proceed to the final round." The words hung in the air, a quiet earthquake that shifted the room's foundation. Lydia's face paled, her smile a brittle mask as she whispered to a neighbor who ignored her. The crowd's applause swelled again, but Emma didn't linger. She gave a small nod, her fingers brushing the silver pendant at her neck, and stepped off the stage, her sneakers silent against the wood. The auditorium doors loomed ahead, but now they felt like a gateway, not a barrier. As she moved toward the wings, Daniel met her gaze, his smile, a promise of what was to come. The applause faded, but the air in Lincoln Center's auditorium crackled with something new. Emma Larson stepped off the stage, her sneakers whispering against the polished wood, her heart still racing from the nocturne that had silenced the gala's scorn. At 57, she'd bared her soul to a room that had dismissed her, and now, as she retreated to the wings, the crowd's stunned faces lingered in her mind. The spotlight dimmed, but the weight of their shifted gazes followed her, a quiet signal that the evening's hierarchy had begun to unravel. Victor Hensley, the critic whose words could shatter careers, sat motionless in the front row. At 61, his silver hair gleamed under the chandeliers, but his usual air of authority faltered. His pen, once poised to dissect Emma's performance, lay abandoned on his program. He adjusted his glasses, his piercing eyes tracing the spot where Emma had stood, as if recalculating the world he thought he knew. Beside him, Lydia Crane clutched her emerald gown, her smile brittle as she scanned the room for allies. The crowd that had laughed with her earlier now avoided her gaze, their whispers turning inward, laced with unease. "Did you hear her play? A Woman in Pearls," murmured to her companion, her voice low but urgent. "She's the custodian." The auditorium buzzed as the announcer called a brief intermission, and guests rose their conversations a tangle of astonishment and second-guessing. Lydia stood, her heels clicking sharply as she approached a group of orchestra members, her voice bright but strained. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, forcing a laugh. "A nice little surprise, I suppose." The principal violinist, a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair, met Lydia's eyes with a cool nod. "Nice," she said, her tone clipped. "That was extraordinary." She turned away, leaving Lydia stranded, her confidence unraveling like a pulled thread. Others followed suit, their backs a subtle wall, their earlier mockery, now a liability they couldn't afford. Victor rose slowly, his tailored suit immaculate, but his expression unsettled. He approached Daniel Harper, the assistant manager, who stood near the stage, his kind eyes still warm with pride for Emma. "Mr. Harper," Victor said, his voice measured but lacking its usual bite. "Ms. Larson's performance. It raises questions about our selection process." Daniel nodded, his face calm but resolute. "It raises questions about what we value, Mr. Hensley. Talent doesn't always come with a degree." Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he glanced toward the wings where Emma had disappeared, and for a moment his stern facade softened, revealing a flicker of regret. Backstage, Emma leaned against a velvet curtain, her breath steadying as the reality of her performance sank in. Her fingers brushed the silver pendant at her neck, the musical note a quiet anchor. She'd expected rejection, perhaps even laughter, but not this tide of recognition that felt both exhilarating and heavy. A young usher, the same one who'd asked her to leave the lobby earlier, approached hesitantly. "Ms. Larson, I didn't know," he stammered, his face flushed. "I'm so sorry about before." Emma met his eyes, her expression gentle but unyielding. "It's all right," she said softly. "You were just doing your job." The usher nodded, retreating with a look of gratitude, as if her forgiveness had lifted a weight. The crowd's chatter grew louder as they returned to their seats, but the tone had shifted. Those who'd mocked Emma now spoke in hushed tones, their apologies veiled in compliments. "I always thought she seemed special." A man in a tuxedo said to his wife, who nodded a little too eagerly. Lydia, now isolated, tried to rejoin Victor's circle, but he waved her off, his attention fixed on the stage. "We'll discuss your remarks later," he said curtly, his words a quiet rebuke. Lydia's face paled, her hands twisting the program into a crumpled mess, her earlier triumph reduced to a fleeting misstep. Emma emerged from the wings summoned for the final round's announcement. She stood at the stage's edge, her faded jacket a stark contrast to the gleaming piano behind her. Victor took the microphone, his voice steady but humbled. "Ms. Larson," he said, addressing her directly, "your performance has reminded us that music transcends credentials. You've earned your place here." The crowd applauded not out of obligation, but with genuine warmth, their earlier disdain replaced by admiration. Emma nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice clear and calm. "I didn't come to prove anything. I just wanted to play." She stepped back, her sneakers silent, and moved toward the auditorium doors. The crowd parted slightly, their eyes following her, with a mix of awe and shame. Lydia stood frozen, her gaze dropping to the floor, unable to meet Emma's as she passed. Victor watched her go, his pen still untouched, his world quietly rearranged. The doors closed behind Emma, but the echo of her music lingered, a testament to a truth no one could ignore. As the gala resumed, the stage lights brightened and the next phase of the evening loomed, promising a reckoning that would resonate far beyond this night. For years, Emma Larson had walked these halls unseen, her dreams tucked away like a melody no one heard. At 57, she'd carried the weight of a life shaped by sacrifice. Nights scrubbing Lincoln Center's marble floors, days letting her daughter's future eclipse her own. The gala's scorn had stung, but it wasn't new. She'd faced whispers before, felt the sting of being dismissed as less. Yet, as she stood outside the auditorium, the echo of her nocturne still vibrating in her chest, Emma realized something had shifted. She hadn't played to win their applause. She'd played to honor the girl who'd once believed music was her birthright. Her fingers brushed the silver pendant at her neck, the musical note her mother had given her, its edges worn smooth by time. She thought of the nights she'd hummed Chopin alone, the years she'd let her passion simmer in silence. She'd thought belonging meant fitting their mold, wearing their clothes, speaking their language. But standing there, her sneakers firm against the ground, Emma understood belonging wasn't about their approval. It was about claiming her own voice raw and unpolished, and letting it ring true. She'd stepped into their spotlight not to be like them, but to be herself, flawed, resilient, alive. As she walked toward the exit, the late autumn sun spilled through the glass doors, casting her shadow long and steady. Her faded jacket felt lighter, now her canvas bag no longer a burden. The music had set her free, not from them, but from the fear of being unseen. She paused, her hand on the door, and smiled softly, the first true smile of the night. Emma Larson was enough. Have you ever found your voice when the world told you to stay silent? Share your story below, and let us know where you're watching from. Subscribe and hit the bell to join us for more stories of courage that remind us it's never too late to shine.